It looks like almost everyone has now entered the presentation from the Zoom waiting room. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Pellicciati. Thank you again for joining us, or thank you for joining us this afternoon. And if you're here in the Zoom room, it's because you registered for the overview for the MCAS-Alt. That's the alternate assessment for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And this training specifically is for special education supervisors or administrators. It's really designed as an overview and designed to give you a little guidance and background how to support educators and IEP teams who are assigning students the MCAS-Alt. It is not a traditional MCAS-Alt training to order to build an MCAS-Alt, to compile the portfolio. There was a training the other day, and that was kind of the intro to core concepts for the MCAS-Alt. There'll be another one coming up. And those trainings will be available on the DESE's YouTube channel in about a week or so because they're going to be all captioned. And again, my name is Robert Pellicciati. I currently work at the department as the manager of inclusive assessment. And I am joined by Kevin Froten. Kevin Froten is our Cognia program manager. And Kevin is going to help provide the nuts and bolts of the presentation in terms of making sure there's some logistic support and the slides are coming through. And Kevin works for Cognia. What Cognia does is Cognia is our contractor, and they really help prepare MCAS-Alt forms and graphs, which you'll hear a little bit about today. They help with shipping in the materials, help with the scoring process, and delivering the score reports. So they're very important contractor, and they really help us deliver a final product and provide support to all our educators out there in the state. I'm also joined by Sheila Chamberlain and Diane Castell. They're going to remain off screen, but they'll probably answer questions in the background. And these two educator consultants are super familiar with the MCAS-Alt. They've been working with it for the past several years, and they provide a lot of technical support. So if there's some burning questions in there, some questions that educators have, they may be able to provide some support to that today. Just a little background and a little housekeeping before we get in. I want to talk about a couple important points. One, I want to talk about our educational vision. Whenever we begin a presentation of the department, talking to our educators, our special education leaders, we're reminded of our educational vision. We have to make sure that all the work we're doing is really grounded in this vision. That's the reason why we're here, reason why we're doing our work, is at the end of the day, we're thinking about students and thinking about results and information that helps students in meeting their vision, meeting the vision we have for them, making sure that they're known and valued, making sure that we can figure out how we can have relevant real-world learning experiences. And even though our students are working on academic supports that are substantially modified below grade level, how can we help them achieve and get to grade level materials? That's our educational vision, and we really want to talk about that. And we give a little refresher when we begin our presentation to make sure I'm thinking about that to help frame my discussion and motivation for today's discussion piece. A little housekeeping for everyone, just the logistics for today's session. If you write answers in the Q&A, they may be answered during the presentation, but we suggest you wait until specific times when I have times that I'm going to go through and answer some of the questions. I want to make sure that you're not busy asking a question that may be answered during the presentation. So please, if you could, save some questions till the end, because I'm probably going to go over a lot of questions and provide answers to questions you may have. The chat is disabled, so you will not be able to ask questions in the chat, but we may drop slides in there or information to you in the chat. If you have specific questions about I have a student who questions, we tend to say, you want to email MCAS@mass.gov with those questions. Those would be specific questions for a specific student that's considered like a unique situation. Those are the kind of questions you want to email MCAS@mass.gov. I mentioned earlier that we have sessions that are going to be provided on the department's or DESE's YouTube site. This session will also be recorded, and we're going to provide a recording of it with closed captioning, and it should be available within a few weeks. I really thank everyone in advance of today's presentation for taking time out of your busy schedule to learn a little more about the MCAS alternate assessment for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. We have a few topics we're going to discuss today. The first topic we're going to talk about is the participation requirements and eligibility for the MCAS-Alt. What does that mean? Last year, we rolled out a new definition that definition that was developed with a lot of working group stakeholder input and also required by the federal government. The federal government requires us to make sure we have a definition and eligibility criteria for the most significant kind of disabilities, and only students that meet the definition will participate in an alternate assessment. Please know that every Student Succeeds Act and state law requires that all students participate in statewide assessment. We tend to say the motto is it's not a question of whether they participate, but how will they participate? That's the expectation. 99% of the students should be participating in statewide assessments in a standard format with either using accessibility features or accommodations. A very small number of students that meet the definition. And if you use the slides here, there you can see the link will take you to the eligibility criteria that meet the definition for a student with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Only those students should be considered for an alternate assessment based on alternate academic achievement standards. And that's due to several reasons. One is that by designating a student to an alternate assessment, what we're saying is that students' expectations are significantly lower, less complex than meeting less complex standards than their age-related peers. And only the student's IEP determines and documents how the student will participate in the required statewide assessments. Again, that's up to the student's IEP team. We have a decision-making tool. This decision-making tool helps IEP teams guide their decisions about how students will participate in ALT and MCAS assessments. As you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's the first question that the IEP teams will ask themselves or ask the team, okay, students got to participate in MCAS assessment, it's required. First of all, I want to know, does a student meet the definition for a student with the most significant cognitive disabilities? And you see on the left-hand side of your screen, the definition. There's 4 criteria. Again, this criteria was developed along with stakeholders and input from various stakeholders in the state, educators, and also informed by practices in other states and by our involvement with a national advocacy group, the National Centers for Education Outcomes, that really focuses on assessment for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. These 4 points, the first 3 are pretty standard in the sense that it emphasizes that students who meet the criteria have to have significant delays in attaining academic achievement standards, even with supports. They have to have significant challenges, significant cognitive disabilities that impact and affect their educational performance. These students require direct, extensive individualized instruction and substantial support. I'm not going to read everything to you. But what I really want you to hone in on is the words in bold. We wanted to help concretize the process for IEP teams. This is something that most other states do when they have a specific range of an assessment that students have to meet in order to be eligible for the alternate assessment. So all of this is basically shown by evidence, and the evidence is that based on our assessment of their cognitive abilities and their adaptive skills, that they're performing 2 standard deviations below the mean in those areas. By adaptive behaviors, we're talking about daily living skills, communication, self-care, social skills, or academic skills. And the school psychologist at your district, the evaluation team, uses the data that they collect to determine the student meets that area. Sometimes it's collected during an early education evaluation. Sometimes it's collected later on. But again, the IEP team should be collecting this information for a variety of information, because if you suspect a student has global delays, you have to assess the student in all areas. So again, bringing you back to the first question, the IEP team asks, does a student meet this definition? If the student does not meet the definition, all 4 important points, the expectation is the student's going to take the standard test with or without accommodations. If the student does meet the eligibility definition, the IEP team can consider whether the alternate assessment is appropriate for the student. There is a decision-making tool. This decision-making tool is considered a required special education form that you will not update. You will no longer update in Security Portal. but you will retain within the student's files, and the program monitoring group will be looking for this tool as they evaluate school districts and making sure IEP teams are correctly determining which students participate in alternate assessments. And this participation tool is available on our website, and it's a help guide teams make those decisions. And it basically breaks down those four important points of the criteria into 4 boxes. They look at that particular student. Does the student have cognitive disabilities evidenced by significant delays? Does it impact their educational performance? Does it require direct and extensive support? Does the student perform significantly below average in general cognitive functioning adaptive behavior? If they answer yes to all of these questions, then the team has determined that the student could be eligible for alternate assessment. If they don't, if there's a no question, then the student is not eligible. And this is to help the team guide the decision and help provide some insurance to make sure students are not erroneously placed on alternate assessments. We're getting to some important updates for this year. Students in grade 8. All students in grade 8 have to participate in a civics assessment. Therefore, there's an alternate assessment component requirement for those students who are taking the alternate assessment in grade 8. There are trainings on that, and there's going to be some more trainings on that this week. So the method that you register for this flyer is the same, this training I should say, is the same method that educators will register for the training on how to conduct an alternate assessment in civics. And I want to say a big thank you to Kevin for putting information on the participation tool in the chat bar. That is very helpful. Thank you, Kevin. And I think Kevin will also drop in the flyer for everyone if you need some support on register, or your educators need some support on registering for the civics training, how to conduct the assessment domain civics for the alternate assessment. Again, I mentioned that only students that meet the eligibility definition of the students with the most significant cognitive disabilities should participate in the alternate assessment. And somewhat of a change in policy is that what we're saying and what teams should consider is that only students who have global delays should be taking the alternate assessment. Therefore, if a student has close to grade level skills and they're going to take the standard and test in one area, that student should be taking the same standard test in all areas using accommodations or special access accommodations. And I mentioned earlier to everyone today that the alternate assessment participation tool is considered a required form and it's going to be maintained by the school. Maintained by the school. Just a little housekeeping for everybody today. Talk about some important information and tasks. Please know that if there was a score appeal submitted for preliminary results for an MCAS-Alt, those score appeal results or information were mailed back to schools in early July. The school administrator or principals should have received those appeal decisions. Important to know that your educators who are working on evaluating a student for the MCAS-Alt this year, they have to make sure they register in MCAS forms and graphs every year. So if they had an account last year, that account would not carry over. They have to register for the assessment this year with their new students, even if their students took the alternate assessment last year. The alternate assessment is based on the student's grade. Please know that this may be a small point, and then I'll get back to it specifically to you later, is that Forms and Graphs has a lot of tools, features built in. And so for educators completing specific required strands in, like, let's say mathematics, for example, the Forms and Graphs tool allows educators, when they go in, to find the most challenging entry point to evaluate the student on. And I'll talk a little more about entry points and evaluation of students on the alternate assessment later on in the presentation. Just I want to let you know, put a plug in for Forms and Graphs. It's a really great tool, and educators using this tool, that's basically how the 90% of their work will be done in Forms and Graphs, documenting data, documenting the students learning towards these particular entry points of measurable objectives, identifying how students are learning, making progress on the alternate academic curriculum standards this school year. Please know there's updated manuals and materials. These updated manuals and materials are available if they use the links here provided in the slides. There's a brand new educator's manual, and there's a brand new resource guides, which basically are considered the alternate academic achievement standards for students participating in the alternate assessment. We let educators know that educators that are completing a science portfolio, students are completing a science portfolio in grade 5 and grade 8, they may use up to 2 years of evidence the year before and the current year to complete that portfolio, because the test is based on the 2 years of the student's curriculum framework that they're working on. As an administrator, you may want to know, how do I order materials for the MCAS-Alt? What is the administration process? What's my role in this particular assessment domain for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities? What you'll want to know is that the windows to order material, the ordering material window, opens in January. So you don't have to do anything right now in terms of ordering materials. It's open this January through January 2nd through January 17th. That's how you will order materials. You order the binders for the number of students participating in the alternate assessment. Around mid-February, schools should receive the shipment of material. What as administrator you'll do is you'll look through the material summary, order the make sure all the appropriate materials are delivered, and you review the what we call the material summary form, as I mentioned, but you also complete the PCPA, the Principal Certification of Proper Administration, Part 1 only, online, and certify that the quantity of materials you receive is accurate. Again, you want to make sure if you ordered 5 binders, you receive 5 binders. If you need more, you want to order additional materials at that time. Please know, as an administrator, the deadline to order additional materials is Tuesday, March 25th. And you can use this little link here, visit the MCASservicecenter.com to order additional materials for the MCAS-Alt. The material summary sheet is basically outlined right here for you. Each school should get, for material summary, 1 per school, a 3-ring binder, one per student. So each student taking the ALT, there should be a binder. So if you have 5 students taking the ALT, you'll have 5 binders, 5 student identification booklets if you have 5 students, a SIB sheet, student identification booklet instruction sheet, one per school. That's only 1 per school. Labeled MCAS-Alt envelope, 1 per student. UPS shipping labels, 1 label per 10 binders, so you can ship them back in up to 10, and a pre-printed student ID label, that's 1 per student in grades 4 through 8, who participated in MCAS-Alt previously at the school. And there's an MCAS-Alt score appeal FAQ, and that's 1 per school, and the FAQ obviously is frequently asked questions. So if an administrator or educator would like to check on how the MCAS-Alt is scored and they have questions in the scoring process, there's information how to appeal the score. Let's talk a little bit about the preparation and submission of the MCAS-Alts. How do we prepare and how do we submit the MCAS-Alts? As an administrator, you want to ensure a few steps are taken. 1, you want to make sure that the student's binder is placed in a large plastic bag. The plastic bag is provided. Do not seal the large plastic envelope, just place it in there. You want to make sure each demographic label and the large plastic envelope is complete. You want to make sure that if there's any unused binders or materials, you return those, and there's further instructions on how to pack unused materials, and they're available within the shipment. We have the MCAS Service Center that's available for you for support, and you want to basically use the online tool at the MCAS Service Center to schedule the UPS pickup. This is super important to schedule the UPS pickup because the materials have to be picked up by a certain date for us to score them, for us to, the educator and the student to receive credit for their portfolio. It's basically their testing window. If they're not returned by a certain date, student isn't participating in the testing window. So it's really important that you schedule that UPS pickup at the school by 2:30 p.m. on Thursday, March 27th. And the assessments have to be picked up from the school by no later than Friday, March 28th. The important dates I suggest that as an administrator, you think about these dates, write them down, maybe put them in your Outlook calendar now, because it's really important making sure you don't miss these dates. These dates often don't correspond to the standard administration testing window of the MCAS test for students taking the standard test. So really important as a special education administrator, talking to your principal, making sure they're aware of the dates for the students who are taking the alternate assessment in the specific schools. If you had students that participated in the MCAS-Alt, they get what's called a feedback form. So how do we get these feedback forms? The MCAS-Alt feedback forms are found in, like a lot of other things available, or tools available in documents for schools, available in the DESE security portal. Everybody should have an account for the security portal. You want to talk to your director administrator. If you don't have an account, they assign you these particular roles. And once you log into the security portal, you'll look for these particular materials. You'll viewing and downloading MCAS-Alt preliminary material results. What you want to do is you sign into the security portal. Once you sign in, you want to look at MCAS-Alt preliminary results. And you see here for 2024 data, that will be the preliminary results. The slide on the left and the slide on the right shows the particular file. MCAS-Alt feedback forms 2024 PDF, and you see the particular date. That's how you would find and you would download the preliminary results for students who took the MCAS-Alt at your school. And these instructions are also described in the principal's manual for the MCAS-Alt. If you use this link, this will take you to the principal's manual. Again, really important information to view the preliminary results, feedback forms for your students that took the MCAS-Alt and your school. I mentioned earlier there's a score appeal process. Well, what is that? If, for example, an educator feels that their MCAS alternate assessment for the student was somehow misscored, school administrators and educators have an opportunity to say, hey, we need to double check this. I know that I completed this assessment correctly. Everything was documented correctly. What's going on here? So they can appeal that score. So in June, after schools receive these feedback forms, the administrator can submit a score appeal. You see this link here. This is only available in June. And they only do this if there's evidence that the assessment was scored incorrectly. If you didn't submit anything, if you found out later that you didn't submit something you're supposed to, that is not an appeal. An appeal is that what they did submit wasn't scored correctly. It was scored incorrectly. The following materials must be provided by the principal, director, or superintendent for submitting a score appeal. You have to include the feedback form, and that I showed you on the previous slide how to find the feedback form. And you have to include the scores in each rubric area. And you have to include the scores comment on the feedback form for each strand. That's how you would want to review those before you submit the score appeal. When you go to submit the MCAS score appeal, you want to go to the MCAS-Alt score appeal form, and that's located on the MCAS-Alt website. This is only available between June 9th and June 20th. Again, it won't be available now, but later on in the year, if you wanted to submit a score appeal because you had a feedback form that you found questionable, you would want to go through this particular process, and it's only available during June 9th and June 20th. Please know that schools are notified of the appeal results about the end of June. So for next year, that'd be about July, at the end of July 2025. I want to speak for a few minutes about the MCAS participation called MCAP and the participation requirements that was documented by the Every Student Succeeds Act and ESSA. You may, as an administrator, receive information about a waiver extension or statement of assurances for students in your school that are participating in the MCAS-Alt. Well, all this goes under the requirements of the 1% cap that's put on the state by the federal government. This is not a local cap, but a state cap. And basically what it says is that states who assess students on alternate academic achievement standards may not exceed 1% of the total number of students in the state who are assessing that subject. And it defines the 1% based on the total number of students assessed in each subject by the total number of students assessed. Districts, your district may exceed 1% of all students, but you have to provide justification. So the department has, since the beginning of this cap, exceeded the 1% cap. The data was about 1.7% when we first started. Now we're down to about 1.2. We're supposed to reach the cap and show we've made progress making the 1% cap. So you'll receive a lot of information for us, documentation from the department, from DESE about how we're working towards meeting the 1% cap. Again, we have to document that we're providing training and information, providing information to schools about what we call our new definition for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Only these students will be eligible to take the alternate assessment. And again, this all goes back to this particular cap. And this particular cap is requiring us to provide a lot of training and to make sure we're only assessing certain students on these alternate achievement standards. And the rationale is that students who are assessed on alternate academic achievement standards, by the nature of taking the alternate assessment, are exposed to a curriculum that's less rigorous. Another requirement of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, is a parental notification. Remember that parents must be informed as part of the IEP process. If a student's taking an alternate assessment, parents have to be notified that their child's academic achievement will be measured based on alternate academic standards that reflect lower level expectations. Again, ESSA requires parent notification, and the notification has to include, if they're taking an alternate assessment, what does the alternate assessment mean? That the standards are lower, significantly modified, and participation in alternate assessment may delay students meeting their graduation requirement or earning a diploma. We provided a sample parent notification letter that's translated in 5 languages. That's available on the department's website or on DESE's website. If you use this particular link that you were provided in the slides, it will take you to these sample parent notification letters. I want to talk briefly about the MCAS-Alt results for 2024. Look at some of these alts, the results in aggregate. What did we see last year in terms of statewide results? We see pretty similar trend from the past few years in the sense that we've always had about between 16 and 11% of the portfolios were incomplete. About 3% were in the awareness range. But what does that mean? It means that these particular students were working on standards that were very, very significantly modified. These students are basically working on developmental communication skills. Often these students are nonverbal. These students are working on accessing the curriculum at their particular level. If a student is doing that, it means they're gaining awareness of the standard. They're not at the point where they're actually learning the standard, but they're getting awareness of the standard. There are a certain percentage of students that are in the what they call the emerging range. That means they're getting progress on learning the particular alternate academic achievement standard. And there's other students in the progressing range. What does that mean? It means they're making more progress learning those particular challenging alternate academic achievement standards, challenging for their particular skills that are based on the academic standards. We did see more of an increase in incompletes this year than we have, and a little dip in progressing. And that could be due to an increase in the number of portfolios we've seen where the evidence that's submitted did not match what the educator said they were going to do. For example, in science, there's a requirement for the students to be assessed on a particular domain alternate academic achievement standard. That particular alternate academic achievement standard would say something as the student would use a model to have their understanding of perhaps the evaporation or the solar system, if you will. The educator assessing that particular skill did not use a model in the particular evidence. They perhaps used a matching area task, or the evidence was a fill in the blank Therefore, there was no model, and then they did not assess the student on the required standard. So it's really important that when educators are doing these portfolios, they're aware of what they're trying to do, what the student is trying to learn, and if it says the student needs to be exposed to a model and learn to model the process, the educator is developing evidence and materials that assesses their understanding of a model. How can you, as an administrator, support and monitor the MCAS-Alt? How can you support your educators, and how can you oversee the MCAS-Alt test administration? Your particular role or supervisor's role could be to do a couple things. One, you really want to make sure that the educators start early in the year. They're attending these type of trainings. They're getting familiarity with the requirements of the particular portfolio. You also want to make sure that as an administrator, I've heard from other special educator administrators that they really principals reaching out to their educators early on to make sure, see if they need any support. Do they need time within their day, planning to prepare? Do they need to attend trainings? Do they need support of curriculum coordinators? Perhaps they're working on science, and this particular severe special needs teacher who've worked with a variety of students for several years has not worked within the particular science classroom for the past couple of years, and they may not be as familiar with some of the curriculum frameworks as a curriculum coordinator. So you want to make sure they have the necessary support to speak with those curriculum coordinators in the required domains. You also want to permit educators to attend training sessions. Next month in November, we're going to provide a flyer, and the flyer will have dates of review sessions. We have in-person review sessions for educators who are completing these MCAS alternate assessments, and educators can bring their semi-completed or their portfolio in progress, if you will, the MCAS-Alt assessment that is almost complete. They can bring this for a review session and get support from what we call training specialists. These are educators who are very familiar with the process, educator consultants who can make sure and help them figure out if they're collecting information correctly for their particular students, making sure they're documenting what they're supposed to be documenting. And these particular review sessions will be in January and February and March in 2025. You want to make sure that as an administrator or in a building that you're allowing these educators to have some flexible scheduling, time to complete these particular alternate assessments. It may take the educator some time to do this, especially if this is the first time they have not completed an alternate assessment before. Before these particular alternate assessments are submitted, you want to give yourself time as the administrator or the principal to making sure you're reviewing them before you sign off on the PCPA, or making sure that you give an opportunity to review this particular alternate assessment to make sure the educator did everything they're supposed to. Again, as the administrator of the school, you're responsible for correct administration of the assessment. So you're making sure that before you sign anything, ensuring there's proper administration, you're looking at it and providing those educators necessary support. How can I also do this? What can I do? Make sure you want to check in periodically with the educator. You want to make sure you can identify educators in the district who may be more familiar with the alternate assessment. Those educators could provide support. This is the part where I don't necessarily like to go into too much detail, but I feel it's really important. You really want to make sure that the alternate assessments are authentic, making sure that the educator is not fabricating any dates or additional work. It has happened in the past that an educator has not started collecting evidence until later on in the year, and we found information to indicate that the educator did fabricate information. And that's always a big concern for the particular educator. When we find this happens, it's basically fabricating an assessment, and that particular educator's license could be sanctioned by the department. So really want to make sure that the MCAS alternate assessment includes authentic data. I know that 99% of the educators go in there with good intentions. They exactly want to do everything correctly. Sometimes they're in a bind at the last minute trying to collect information. So making sure you're really working with them, making sure providing support so no one is flustered at the end of the school year with collecting evidence. You want to make sure you're sending reminders and deadlines to ensure completion of the materials by the required due date. And remember, a verification form is not a consent form. We always want to give a parent an opportunity to review the assessment before it is submitted. I actually spoke with a parent just the other day, and she was really, really happy that this one particular school gave her an opportunity to review the child's alternate assessment, to document all the work the child was working on the year before. Last school year, the parent actually was quite upset. They didn't have an opportunity to review the child's alternate assessment portfolio, and the parent was quite unnerved by this process. They were really wanted to take a look at it, and they felt like they were cheated in a way. They didn't get a chance to look at all the material the child was working on during this particular school year. How do we interpret MCAS-Alt results? How, as an administrator, how would you interpret MCAS-Alt results? There are 4 what we call achievement levels. I mentioned them earlier: awareness, emerging, progressing, incomplete. I'm not going to read all the material to you. I know you can certainly read this, just making sure you know that just like the standard MCAS test, there are achievement levels. A student takes the standard MCAS test, not meeting expectations, partially meeting expectations, meeting or exceeding. Same thing for the alternate assessment. However, really important to know, if a child receives an alternate assessment achievement level of progressing, they are progressing, but they are still in the not meeting expectation category, meaning that the child's skills are still not at grade level. So just because a student meets the progressing achievement level doesn't mean they're achieving commensurate with their grade level peers. Really important to know that. We just want to provide these achievement level descriptors so parents and educators, administrators understand the challenging entry points, academic entry points for the child is working on at the particular skill level. As a principal in a building, many principals want to know, how would MCAS-Alt results be included into the accountability system? So you have these students, some of your students are taking an alternate assessment. I imagine not many, but how are they counted? How these students' results get counted with the accountability system? So for each student taking an MCAS alternate assessment, they receive an assigned MCAS equivalent scale score. If you look at this particular table below, you will see the MCAS-Alt achievement level and the assigned MCAS equivalent scale score level. So if a student gets a particular incomplete, that student is assigned an MCAS equivalent scale score of 455, awareness 470, emerging 485, progressing 500. Again, these are assigned scores for the student for purpose just of the accountability system. The students are not actually earning a score of 500 if they get progressing on the MCAS-Alt. It's for the accountability system for that particular school. Again, I mentioned this earlier, just to reiterate, a score of progressing does not mean this student is passing, does not mean they passed the test. The score of progressing means the student is making progress. They're learning new knowledge and concepts, but obviously they're still achieving below grade level expectations. Progressing does not mean passing, and if they receive progressing, they would not achieve their graduation, they would not meet the composite determination. These students would have to be working on a portfolio appeal. Perhaps they're taking a class later on in a cohort appeal, or they're going to be preparing to take the retest if they're in a program where they're maybe going to be learning the standard slowly. And perhaps by the time they're 21, they're at the ability where they can make progress and up to a level where they can meet the minimum passing score. I spoke for about 40 minutes there. I really appreciate everyone's time. I know that it was just me speaking. I really thank you for your time logging on to this particular conversation to learn about the MCAS-Alt from an administrator's perspective or supervisor's perspective. We have some email and phone support. I really thank everyone for your afternoon. I hope this was brief, to the point, and informative. I really want to make sure I'm using your time wisely. I know everyone's very busy at this beginning of school year, making sure our students all have, and our educators have correct coverage, making sure everyone's acclimated to and off to a great school year that's productive. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please email the department regarding policy, or any questions, you certainly could email Kanya. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful Wednesday, and thank you again, and have a great afternoon, everybody.